So one question we get asked a lot is, what leader should I be using? And it's a great question because it's pretty important to how your fly is actually going to cast and present. And the answer is, it's a balancing act of having a leader that's thin enough that you're not going to spook the fish and your fly is going to behave properly in the water, but then also having something stiff enough and strong enough to both cast the fly effectively and to fight the fish that you're targeting. So you're trying to always balance between those two, and usually you basically want to be as thin as you can get away with so that your fly can behave naturally, but you're not struggling to cast it. And so when I say, be stiff enough to cast the fly, I think the easiest way to think of it is almost like how a rod works. So basically, the stiffer, the thicker your leader is, the more pop it's going to have, the more wiry it's going to be, and the more power it's going to be able to put into turning over your fly and getting that leader to straighten at the end of your cast. So if you think of it like a rod, this rod has an amount of power so that when it's bent, just like a leader, as the leader's turning over, it's going to have some stiffness and some pop to it at the end to be able to fling over, for lack of a better word, and cast your fly. You can imagine if this was really, really limp, like say, here's a piece of rope, this thing is bent over, it's got no power behind it to turn anything over. Now, those are two very extreme examples, but I think it helps get that mental image of what you're trying to do when I say turn over a fly. The stiffer the leader is, the stiffer the line is, the more power it's going to have to straighten at the end of your cast. So what does that mean when you're actually looking at the leader? How do you read the labels on a leader when you're in the store? There's two ways that leaders are generally going to be labeled. One, when you're buying trout-sized leaders, is with an X value. Now, the X system, it's not hard to understand, but it's kind of weird. It's not intuitive by any means. It's an old, antiquated kind of sewing metric that's used for measuring thread thickness, and we've just repurposed it to measure line. All you need to know is that the higher the number on an X value, the thinner the line is. If you really want to know what it means, a 0x leader measures 11 thousandths of an inch at its thinnest point at the end. A 1x leader is 10 thou, a 2x is 9 thou, and so on. For every additional X value you add, you subtract 1/1000th of an inch. Don't ask me why we thought that was an easy system to understand. It's just what it is to make it easy. They also have the actual diameter printed on the bottom of these things if you forget. And again, at the end of the day, you don't need to get too in the weeds with this. You don't need to know exactly how thick it is. Just have some understanding of, am I buying a thicker or lighter leader, is a good place to start. The other way you'll see these marked is with tensile strength. And you usually see this system used when you're talking about heavier leaders, say a leader that you might use for bass or pike, saltwater purposes, where you're using lines that are actually thicker than the X value system accounts for. So thicker lines than 11 thousandths of an inch, you can't really use that system, and so we actually just print the diameter of the leader on here. The tensile strength doesn't matter so much. The fish don't care how strong the line is. We do, but it's not going to affect how the leader casts. What affects that is the diameter. So pay attention again to the actual diameter on the bottom of here. That's the best thing to pay attention to. Really, you can keep it quite simple. Bigger fly, use a thicker, stiffer leader, you'll be in good shape. There is a little rule of thumb when it comes to your trout sizes of leaders that you can remember. Makes for a good starting point. These aren't hard and fast rules, but it's a good way, when you're starting off, to kind of get something that you know is going to be appropriate for what flies you're casting. And so it works like this. Again, it's really just for trout flies, but if I have a size 8 fly, like I have here with this hopper, what I'm going to do is divide that by 3, and that gives me the X value that I should be pairing with the fly. So 8 doesn't divide cleanly by 3, but we can say it should be about a 3x leader, or you could bump it up to maybe a 2x, serve in between, so you can go either way, choose your own adventure, and that will pair well with this fly. So take the size of the hook, divide it by 3, that's your X value. Another example, got a little like size 12 caddis here. If I want to do the same thing, 12, divide by 3, a 4x leader will be appropriate for a size 12 hook. It's a good starting point. Feel free to play with it a little bit from there. When you're into bigger bass flies, a small bass fly like these Mr. Wigglies or a lightweight fly, you can get away with, say, a 10-pound bass leader. If you're getting into bigger, bushier poppers and streamers, just bump it up to something like maybe a 16 pound, and you can play with it to see what you're comfortable casting. But just remember, if you're having a hard time turning over your fly, getting your leader to straighten, that means you should be using a thicker diameter leader, assuming it's not a casting flaw, to get that thing to straighten. And if the fly is not behaving as it should, maybe consider dialing it back, going with something a little thinner. That's really all there is to it. If you ever need anything, we're always here for you in the shop.